Hey friend, in this video we are going to do a crash course in music theory specifically targeted to songwriting and songwriters, because a lot of music theory is taught in a way that sort of feels like it's more meant as academic knowledge, or maybe it's just to be able to enjoy music better and be able to understand it better from a sort of consumption point of view, which is great. But as songwriters, we need to understand theory through the lens of how does this actually help me to write a song? And that's what I want to talk about in this video. So the first thing to understand is going to be keys. The second one is going to be chords in context of keys. These are the two important things for us to grasp as songwriters. There are certainly other pieces of music theory that are incredibly helpful, that there's a lot of depth and nuance to these things. Obviously, we're only going to be able to cover these to a degree that's going to be helpful, but is not totally comprehensive. But I guess just as a quick example, what we cover today essentially will be enough for you to understand how music works, such that you could essentially just play within a key So that was just improvising in the context of C major, right? The knowledge that I used to do that, very simple, right? But it's a melody and a chord progression, right? My left hand's doing a chord progression, my right hand's doing a melody. All of the things that, all the understandings that go into that are essentially what we're covering, which will help you to write chord progressions and help you to write melodies that work with those chord progressions. And the thing that's foundational to that is understanding keys. When I did that, my thought was, I'm going to improvise in the context of C major. And C major gives me the context of what notes that I have to work with, and what chords I have to work with, and what their job is in context of that key. So for instance, it was very intentional that I ended on this chord. It's a G major chord, because it wanted to resolve to that C major chord, which helped it sound like, yes, it is complete at the end. That was through understanding keys and chords in context of keys. So let's talk about keys first, because that's the foundational part. So the concept of a key is basically a tonic and then a series of notes off of that tonic, or you could think of it as the tonic and the quality, which is when we name it what we're actually saying. So we might say C major. Tonic is C, the quality is major. Then there's C minor. The tonic is C, and then the quality is minor in that instance. This would apply to modes too, by the way. If you know what modes are, then probably this video might be too basic for you, but I don't know, maybe not. But if we have C Phrygian, that's the tonic. C is going to be the tonic, and then Phrygian is telling you what the notes off of that are, and gives you an idea of what sort of the sound would be. Because just as major and minor sound different, so do modes sound different when you get into Phrygian and Mixolydian and Lydian and all that kind of stuff, which is great stuff, but too complex for this video. So keys. First thing to understand was the name, right? C major, D minor, A sharp minor, whatever. Note, which is your tonic, and then the quality. And that quality is what tells you the series of notes that are included in that key, which we'll break down in a very, very simple way. So, C major. Let's take C major. When you sit to improvise, which is usually the foundation of songwriting, right? You improvise with your voice, you improvise with your guitar, you improvise with your piano, you try different chord progressions, right? That's a form of improvisation where you're like, okay, C major chord, and then let's try going to an A minor chord, and then let's try going to an F major chord, and then let's go to a G major chord, and then let's go to C major chord. Right? That's a form of improvisation. You're writing a chord progression, but you're improvising a chord progression, right? I didn't plan that beforehand. I already don't remember what I just did. I just was picking chords that were in context of the key of C major, so I started with the thought, C major. Now let's write a chord progression within that context. So keys are very foundational. All right. So first, if you don't want to memorize anything to do with how to figure out what notes are in keys, or you just don't want to do that right now, go grab my cheat sheet. It breaks down all of the major keys and all the notes in all the major keys and all the main chords or triads, which we'll break down what triads are later in this video, but all your major and minor chords essentially that are in that key. So it breaks down, C major, the notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and the major chords are going to be C major, F major, G major. The minor chords will be D minor, E minor, A minor, and then you have a diminished chord, which is B minor. So if you want to kind of bypass this part for now, then go check that out. Also, you should probably go check that out regardless. If this video is helpful to you, that guide, that free check, definitely is going to be helpful to you. Guaranteed, if this video is helpful to you. So back to keys. The one thing you have to memorize to be able to figure out all of the notes within any key, any major key, we're going to concentrate on major today because most music is in major, and for the sake of time. But if you memorize one thing, you can figure out any of the notes that you have in any major key. And that's to memorize whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So 2 wholes and then a half, and then 3 wholes and then a half. And you might say, what on earth is that? Well, it's talking about whole steps and half steps, which is a very easy concept to understand. A half step is from the note you're on to the very next note. So C to C sharp would be a half step. C sharp to D would be a half step. D to D sharp or E flat, different name for it, right, would be a half step. A whole step is just, instead of one half, well, first of all, you probably can figure out if a half step is going up by 1, what is a whole step? That's right, going up by 2. Look how smart you are. So that's all a whole step is, right? It's 2 half steps. So if C to C sharp is a half step, C over C sharp all the way to D, all the way, is going to be a whole step. So going back to all major keys are whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If we want to figure out, let's say you don't know what D major is, let's figure out together what the notes are. We said whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So a whole step from D is going to be going over D sharp, because that would be a half step, right, to E. So D, E, and then another whole step, whole, whole, half. So we're on the second whole. So we would go over F sharp, which is the very next note, the half step, to F sharp. So far we have that. And then we have half, right? Whole, whole, half. So that's the very next note, F sharp to G. And then we have whole, 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 half. So another whole, another whole, another whole, and then finally the half is actually what takes us back to D. So just from memorizing whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we figured out the notes of D major, which is D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, then back to D. We could do this with any key, right? We could do it with A flat major or E major, any of them, because all you have to memorize is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, which you probably already have memorized because I've said it like 5 times already. Now, this is a good way to be able to figure out semi-slowly any key immediately. If you memorize whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, starting today for the rest of your life, if somebody says E major, C major, A flat major, you will be able to, given maybe a few seconds, maybe even a minute, you will be able to figure out slowly, okay, what note would it have? Whole, whole, half. You'll be able to figure it out. Now, obviously, in the context of songwriting, that's only so helpful, right? Because very often, for instance, when I just did, I'm not thinking about whole, whole, half, right? There's not enough time. There's not enough time to be thinking whole, whole, half and all that. So it's very important that over time, you just memorize this. And at some point, you kind of even go past thinking about the notes and the chords that you have in the key so much as you just know the key. You're just not even thinking in terms of notes. But this all is something that comes over time with learning and then practice. Learning and then practice. You have to learn the theory, and then you practice. You apply the theory, and then you get better and better at it until you can just like improvise in D major without thinking about like, okay, D major has an F sharp and a C sharp, and oh, and now I'm in G major and that only has an F sharp. It doesn't have a C sharp. It has a C natural. You don't want to be thinking about that eventually. So the key is memorizing keys. Again, check out my free cheat sheet breaking down all the notes of every major key and all the main chords, the triads of every major key as well. But eventually you do want to commit those to memory. Start small. Start with the most common keys. C major, which is very easy to memorize, is the second most common key of all time. G major, I believe, is the most common. That, luckily, is the second most simple key of all, or tied for second most simple, given it only has one sharp. C major is just all the white keys, no sharps or flats. It's just very simple. It's all the notes that are not sharp or flat. That's it, C major. G major is that, except you don't have an F natural, you have an F sharp instead. Super complex, right? There are other ways to memorize this. Circle of fifths is a great way to go. We're not going to break down circle of fifths because I don't want to take too much time. I want to keep this as practical to songwriting as I can. So in the name of practicality for songwriting, again, I want to emphasize that yes, it's good to have a framework of understanding what keys are or how to figure out the notes of keys. But what's more important is sort of learning how to use them and knowing them well enough to be able to improvise within them. So, for instance, if you are a pianist and you want to write your vocal melody with the piano, and you know that the chord progression that was written, which we're going to talk about chord progressions in a bit, because I know a lot of times you start with chord progressions, but ironically you need to learn keys first, and then chords built off of keys, and then keys are going to be important for like all sorts of things, like writing hooks, writing melodies, all that, and then chords. A lot of people start with writing chord progressions, but with theory, we can't actually start with chords. We can't responsibly start with chords, I would say. But let's say you know that a song is in D major, and you're trying to figure out the melody. So you're listening back to this chord progression. You shouldn't be playing all kinds of notes that sound super wrong because you know, okay, this song in this chord progression is in D major. So I'm going to stick with D major notes. So you're just knowing what notes you have in that key. And that's going to help you with all sorts of things, even like guitar solos, for instance. If you know, okay, this song is in A major, so I'm going to improvise using only the notes from the scale A major, it's generally going to work. Almost anything is going to work. Maybe if your note sounds kind of wrong, just go to the next note, and it almost certainly won't sound wrong anymore. Which is a whole other rabbit hole we could talk about, which is sort of improvisation stuff. But the important thing to understand is keys are the context of your song. The context of your song in that they give you the subset of notes that you generally want to utilize in the song, which is very practical, right? When you write the melody, you want the melody to use notes from the key of the song. When you write your chord progressions, you want the chords to all use notes that are in the context of the song. So it's helpful in that way. But it's also helpful really to understanding chords in the way that is helpful, which is understanding chords in context of keys. Because a lot of people just think of things like, oh, G major chords sound happy and A minor chords sound sad. And that's true, at least to an extent, and by themselves that's true, right? If I just do this, that sounds happy. If I just do this, sounds a little more sad. Because it's so high up, it sounds a little less sad, but right down there it sounds really moody. There's truth to that. I'm not diminishing that. That's not the most important way or the most helpful way to understand chords and how they sound. Instead, what is much more helpful is understanding how a chord sounds in the context of the key it is in. Let me give you a quick example. We're going to play a chord progression, very simple, in C major, and then end with a C major chord. And then we're going to play a chord progression in G major. Actually, no, let's do this. Let's do C major improvisation. And we're going to end with a C major chord. So that was in C major, and then I end on a C major chord. Now let's improvise in G major and end on a C major chord. I just ended on a C major chord. Does that sound resolved? Or does it sound like, wait, why'd you stop? You need to resolve. We did something like... Now it sounds resolved because I went to the G major chord. So this is the important thing to understand. When I left on that C major chord in the context of G major, that's the C major chord. And G major sounded really resolved in C major, right? And here it's just like, what? You're going to end there? That sounds complete. That's because chords, the sound of a chord is much more determined by the key that it's in than the chord itself. C major chord in C major sounds resolved. C major chord in G major does not sound resolved because in the context of C major, a C major chord is a 1 chord. In the context of G major, a C major chord is a 4 chord, which brings us to chords and the very important way to understand chords, which is the Roman numeral notation way of seeing chords. And essentially, if we just go back to keys for a moment, because we need to utilize keys to get to this. This is why we started with keys. Let's take C major. We covered the way to figure out the notes of all keys, right? So if we apply that again, we know it's whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So the notes in C major are just all the natural notes, or in the context of a piano, just all the white keys. Very simple, which is why pianists love it, because it's the most simple key for a pianist. So to keep it simple, we'll do that. We have C major. Roman numeral notation is just, all it is understanding chords in their context, which is the chord that you have in C major, built off of C, is your 1 chord because of C major. The one built off of the 2 in C major, which is a D, is going to be a 2 chord. The chord built off of the 3 in C major is going to be the 3 chord. I bet you can't guess the next one. 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 7 chord, back to the 1 chord. So that's the first thing to understand. When we say 1 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, what does that mean? A 1 chord is built off of the first scale degree, or the tonic, the name of the key. So in the context of D major is the 1 chord. In the context of G major is the 1 chord. Very simple. And then in the context of C major, G major would be a 5 chord. In the context of G major, D major would be the 5 chord. This is the more important way to understand chords because this is what actually gives them sound. Also, when you are writing chord progressions, it's not about, C major and G major and D major sound good together. Therefore, let me write a chord progression with those. You can do that, and that will get you somewhere. But really, it's that chord progression is in the key of almost certainly G major. We're not going to talk about how let's quickly talk about how I knew that. You told me that you had a chord progression with G major, D major, and C major. I know that means, okay, you have a C natural, not a C sharp, and you have an F sharp, which already, if you know keys, you know that narrows it down to it's in G major. Because even D major would have an F sharp and a C sharp, but we have did I say D sharp? I meant F sharp. An F sharp and a C sharp in D major. So if we have just an F sharp and a C natural, then we know that we're in G major. It's okay if you don't understand that, but hopefully you're starting to understand the actual value when it comes to songwriting and just improvising and all sorts of things. The value of music theory. This is something that eventually would become second nature to you. Also, you just recognize patterns like, that was obviously a 1, a 4, and a 5 chord in G major. G major. I said that right? For some reason, I thought I said D major. But you have the 1, the 4, and the 5. major 1, the major 4, and the major 5. Which brings me to the other important part of Roman numeral notation. If you know Roman numeral notation and this one thing again that I'm going to give you to memorize, you can figure out all the major and minor chords, which are the main chords. They're called triads, by the way, which I haven't determined yet whether that's important to actually cover in this video, what a triad is. But essentially, major and minor chords, most foundational chords there are, right? Probably 75% of all chords ever used are either major or minor. Yeah, there are sus chords and there are seventh chords and there's all kind of stuff. But most chords that end up being used are major, minor. So they're very, very important, very, very foundational. Roman numeral notation, if you understand it, in the context of a major chord, of a major key, your 1 chord, your 4 chord, and your 5 chord will always be major. Your 2, 3, and 6 will always be minor, and your 7 will always be diminished. So you can figure out all the notes in any given major key based on the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, right? Great, cool. When you know the notes of a key, which you can now do for all keys because the first thing we talked about, and then you just put a number on all of them, you know that let's take D major. We know that D major is the 1 chord, and then we said the 2 chord is minor, so we know it's E minor, and we know it's E because, again, the first step, that whole step, half step, that. So then we know we have an F sharp minor chord because the 3 chord is minor. Then we have our 2 major chords in a row, G major, A major, and then we have a B minor because our 6th chord is minor, and then we have a diminished chord with our 7. So that's important for many reasons, including the fact that, again, these are the foundational chords. So if you're sitting and thinking, okay, I want to write a song in the context of G major, you know some of the main chords you have. And if you want to write in G major, you have a G major chord, you have a D major chord, you have a C major chord, and you have an E minor chord, and then let's say back to G major, right? You have an A minor, and again D major, which I then changed to the key of D major apparently because I put that C sharp in there. But anyway, that's why it's important to understand those things, because you know these main chords that you have. And then based on what you know about keys, you also know how to make those chords more than just major or minor. So let's say we're in C major again, make it really simple. You know your 1 chord is a C major, but you also know you could add notes to that chord, maybe make it a 7th chord or a different inversion of the 7th chord. It's okay if you don't know what an inversion is, not important for this video, but an important music theory concept to learn, especially as a songwriter. So you have the 7th chord. You don't even have to know it's called a 7th chord, but you can know, well, there's a B natural in the context of C major. Let's just add that to the C major chord. Okay, and then let's do a chord like this. Those are all notes in the context of C major. Now, technically what we just did is a sus4 chord, or just a sus chord. So a 5 sus4 chord, which in this context of C major is a G sus5 sus4 chord. But if you take your keys knowledge and your chord knowledge, you also can get to a bunch of sus chords, add chords, and all that sort of thing just by changing up little things like what we just did, right? We have C major chord, but take out the 3rd of your C major chord and put in a 4th instead. Now you have a sus chord instead. Or again, accidentally getting to a 7th chord by adding that B, because that's in the context of the key too. And then you have a G major chord, but then you add that 1 back, which technically makes it a add 4 chord, which normally you would call an add 11 chord. Anyway, back to Roman numeral notation. Get a little off course there. A little bit of a rabbit hole, but there's a longer video, so hopefully that's okay. Hopefully there's still something helpful in there for you. But again, just memorize 1, 4, 5 major, 2, 3, 6 minor, 7 diminished. Every major key, if you know the notes in that key, and the name of the key, you now know all the major chords you have and all the minor chords you have. There's always 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and a diminished chord. And you know what all of them are just by these 2 things you memorized. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half is what got you from D major to knowing the notes you had in D major, which again, you should memorize over time because you don't want to have to be thinking about that. You just want to eventually just have memorized, okay, D major is D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and then C sharp. But for now, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, 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 half. Goodness. And then the second thing is memorizing, okay, using those notes, building off of those scale degrees, 1, 4, 5 major, 2, 3, 6 minor, 7 diminished. Then the next step, which we'll cover a little bit here, and I already mentioned it and alluded to it, so we'll try to bring that point home a little bit, is not only are one chords, 4 chords, and 5 chords, not only are they major, but if you think, for instance, in C major, G major, F major, oh, they're all major chords, they sound the same. No. No. They all have a different job. A 1 chord sounds at rest, which is why when I improvised earlier, right? When I improvised in C major, and we ended on a C major chord, it sounded at rest. When we improvised in G major, and ended on a C major chord, that doesn't sound at rest at all. You want me to do that, probably. And now it does sound at rest, because that is a G major chord. So both C major chords, in the context of C major, at rest. In the context of G major, not at rest at all. That's because it's not so important, oh, it's a major chord, oh, it's a minor chord, so much as what is it in the context of the key, thinking in terms, often, of Roman numeral notation. So the reason it sounded the way it sounded, going back to that, is a 1 chord sounds at rest and is the main point of the song. It's the most powerful chord of the song. Very often, the first chord in your chorus will be a 1 chord because that really brings home, like, this is the main point of the song. So it's a common thing to do. You don't have to do it. Please don't write all your songs to start with 1 chords in the chorus now that I said that, but that's a common thing to do. We'll apply this to pre-choruses to show you a little bit how practical this is as well. But in the context of G major, a C major chord is a 4 chord. And a 4 chord sounds different than a 1 chord, which is why the C major sounded so different in the context of G major. There's also a C major chord in the context of F major. Let's do that really quick. That's a C major chord in the context of F major, which really probably you want to resolve down to that F major. Sound more resolved if we did it that way. But that's because in the context of F major, C major is a 5 chord. And a 5 chord sounds different than a 4 chord, which sounds different than a 1 chord. They're all major, but they all have a different job. Going to C major, we said the 1 is simple, easy to remember. It's just home. It's the most powerful chord. It's the main point of the song. It's the musical center of gravity. The 5 chord is the chord that most wants to resolve to the 1 chord. So something that I probably have done in most of these improvisations, because I'm keeping it relatively simple, is when I want you to feel like, oh, it's so resolved, I always go 5 to 1. Why? Because 5 is the chord that most pulls to 1. It really wants to resolve to a 1. And it's outside of the purview of this song to talk about why that is. It's a leading tone, basically. If you know what that is, there you go. There you go. If you want to go Google it after, sure. Actually, I think I have a whole video about leading tones. But 5 chords most want to resolve to 1. So very often when I'm improvising, this is C major, right? So I'll go to, there's G major, A minor. There's that 5 chord. So I go to that 5 chord because I know that 5 chord. I know that 5 chord really wants to go to that 1 chord, and I want to give you that resolution. So I think, okay, go to that 5 chord. And in the context of C major, that's going to be a G major chord. Another way to think about this is when you transpose a song, which, if you don't know what that means, that's like, let's say Celine Dion sings it, right? She's an incredible, crazy singer, and you don't have the range of Celine Dion. So she sings it in E major, but you need to bring it all the way down to B major, which is way lower. When you transpose, the Roman numeral notation of the song stays the same. If the chord progression before was like B major, A major, E major, the Roman numeral notation of that is 5-4-1. So then you would just maintain 5-4-1 just in the context of B major. That's how you transpose, and why a song sounds fundamentally the same, even if you change what key it's in, or if you change the key of one of your own songs because it's not fitting your voice very well, right? You keep the Roman numeral notation the same. If your chord progression was fundamentally a 1-5-6-4, then you just change the key that you play a 1-5-6-4 chord progression. Because fundamentally what makes the song sound like the song is not C major, G major, A minor, F major. It's fundamentally 1-5-6-4. So you can change that 1-5-6-4 to be in any key and it will sound fundamentally the same. This is why this is the more important way to understand chords, is in that Roman numeral notation. So just real quick, because we talked about the 5 chord, this is another example. 4 chords tend to like to resolve up to a 5 and then back and then down to a 1. So very often going from 4, 5, 1 is a pretty common thing to do. By the way, don't always do what the chords want to do, right? Just I probably don't have to say that, but often the art of things is like, oh, I went to a 5 chord. Start with 1. 5, I know it wants to go to, let's say it goes to 4, right? You want that 1 resolution, and I think, no, I'm going to the bridge. I'm going to go to the 6, which isn't quite what you expected. It's the most common twist of all, so it's not like you really didn't expect it. It's not crazy. But, you know, if a build up that you want it to resolve down to that 1, it's actually called a deceptive cadence, by the way, when you go from a 5 to a 6 instead of a 5 to a 1, exactly because it's, you know, somewhat deceptive because it wants to go to the 1, but then you actually went to a minor chord instead. So we don't have time to go through all of these, right? That the tendencies of 4 chords and how 4 chords like to resolve to 1, but it's not as needed as a 5 chord. It certainly still doesn't sound resolved, just like a 5 chord doesn't sound resolved, but it doesn't sound as unresolved as a 5 chord sounds. And then six chords have a different sound than 2 chords and 3 chords. For instance, 3 chords, let's do a 1 chord, 5 chord. A 3 chord really likes to go to a 4, which, by the way, the reason it likes to go to from 3 to 4 is also leading tones. There's the same reason that a 5 wants to go to a 1. So a minor 3 chord really likes to go to a major 4 chord, and a minor 3 chord, right? If I do, let's do 1 5 4, and then we'll do 3, and then 1 5 4, and then a 2. So that's to the 3 at the end, and then same chord progression, but then we'll end with a 2 instead of a 3. That's different, right? That didn't sound the same as the 3. They're both minor chords, but it sounds different. So again, we don't have time to go through all of them, and it's not so simple as just like, oh, here's a quick, you know, these 2 words will make you totally understand 3 chords. No, it's not that simple. some of them are a little more simple, like how the 5 really wants to go to the 1 and all that. And there are some fundamental things, I suppose, about all of them, especially the 1 and the 5 are some of the most fundamental. If there's anything you do want to memorize, it's the 2 that I told you. 5 really wants to go to 1 and 1 is resolved. If you understand those 2 things, you can do a lot with that. For instance, let's apply it to songwriting. I promise this is meant to apply to songwriting, right? And I feel like it's been a few seconds since I specifically called out how to apply it to songwriting. So we just talked about how the 5 really wants to go to the 1. And we talked about the 1 is really resolved. If you put those 2 things together, you may be able to figure out something that a lot of songwriters have figured out, even if they didn't realize it maybe, about how to make a pre-chorus work. So if you think about a verse, a pre-chorus, and a chorus, you can think of it like a bump, set, spike, right? The pre-chorus is all about the chorus, really. That's why it's called a pre-chorus. You're setting for the spike that is the chorus. The chorus has to hit hard, has to be epic and big or catchy or whatever it is you're going for, and has to feel like this is the highlight of the song. So the pre-chorus's job is not to be awesome per se, or not to be epic certainly. It's to set up the chorus to be as big and awesome as it possibly can be. So the job fundamentally of a pre-chorus is different than the chorus. The pre-chorus is a journey to the destination that is the chorus. Gave a bunch of analogies in there, I guess, but hopefully within that you understand pre-chorus versus chorus. So because of that, we don't want the pre-chorus to sound like a destination. We want it to sound like it's on a journey to the destination that is the chorus. And I just talked about how 1 chords sound really resolved, like the main point. And then 5 chords really want to go to 1 chords. So if you put those together, you might figure out something like, let's say I have a verse, which is a 1, 5, 4, and repeat, right? This is the verse. Super common chord progression, which I'm not advocating for, by the way. I'm just trying to keep it simple. So 1, 5, 4. Let's say it's the pre-chorus now. 6, 5, 4, 5, 6, 5, 4, 5, and then chorus. So just by understanding that pre-chorus destination, chorus, or pre-chorus of journey, chorus destination, you might figure out something that is very common with pre-choruses, which is they just avoid the 1 chord. Pre-chorus, no 1 chord, and then often end on a 5 chord so that the chorus can open with the 1 chord in a way that feels like and main point, because you have that 5, 1, or maybe a more fulfilling way, right? So that's where this is practical, where you can apply it to things like, okay, I want the chorus to really explode, and I want the pre-chorus to really not feel like it's the destination, but it's setting up the destination. Something simple like, okay, avoid the 1 chord, and then end your pre-chorus on a 5 chord, and then go to the 1 at the beginning of the chorus. Again, I should not have to say this. Please do not do this with all your songs. There are other ways to achieve a great pre-chorus and a great chorus. But that is a pretty safe start. And if you're at the beginning with songwriting and you just want to be able to write a pre-chorus, just take that and run, right? In your pre-chorus, avoid the 1 chord, and in your chorus, start with the 1 chord. And I guarantee you pretty much it will sound like a pre-chorus to a chorus, especially if you just stick with the main 4 chords, which, by the way, the main 4 chords are always the 1, 4, 5, and 6. A 2 chord is the second most common minor chord, although it's way less common than the 6 chord, which is by far the most common minor chord. And then the 3 major chords are very common, 1, 4, and 5. And then the 3 is even much more rare, which is a tragedy. A 3 chord is probably a 3 chord is my favorite triad of all. I probably overuse it if I'm being honest, but that's neither here nor there. Totally unimportant to this video. So the takeaway, right? Understand chords in context of keys and not just like the notes of C major or A minor, all that. The important part is what is the Roman numeral analysis for this chord progression. G major chords don't sound like G major chords. They sound like whatever they are in the context of the key you're in. If you're in G major, they sound like a 1 chord because they are the 1 chord. If you're in C major, they sound like the 5 chord because they are the 5 chord. And as we've covered ad nauseum now, hopefully, not hopefully, but if there's one thing that I've repeated enough that is in your head forever, it's 1 chord home, 1 chord resolved, 1 chord powerful. 5 chord really wants to go to the 1 chord. So obviously, a G major chord, the 5 chord in the context of C major, is going to sound way different than a G major chord in the context of G major, where it's the 1 chord. Because in one, it wants to go to the destination that is the C major chord, and in the other one, it is the destination. This is why this is the more important way to understand chord progressions. Because when you're writing a chord progression, this is what's important. Not C major to D major or any of that. No, it's 4 chord to 5 chord, 6 chord to 3 chord to 4 chord to 5 chord to 1 chord. That's the important way to understand it, because that's how you get information about what is this going to sound like. A C major chord to a D major, all that is like, what key are we in? What key are we in? Is it a 2 chord to a 3 chord? Is it what is it? That's the important way to understand it. So, from there, if we go back to the keys, let's say you're in C major, and you don't just want boring triads all the time, right? You want some add chords, some 7th chords maybe. So what you can do without even understanding all the theory of like, oh, this is a sus chord and I understand why, and this is a different type of sus chord, and then a major chord, and then let's do another type of sus chord with the 5 chord. That all is something that you should learn. But for the sake of this video, you know that you can change your chord by adding, taking away notes, adding multiple notes from, let's say we're in C major. You have a C major chord. You want to make it more interesting. Okay. Maybe take away the 3rd, add a 2nd. Another note from the key. This is where keys come into play again. You want to keep it within the key. When you add notes, right? That's a kind of gnarly sounding thing. Well, it's not that gnarly actually, but actually ended up being just a 7th chord. But anyway, I was actually trying to make it more, let's see. Okay. Like that might sound weird by itself, but you can make that work in context, and isn't going to sound bad in the context of C major, probably. Again, it depends on context, but you can do things like that just by thinking, okay, I'm going to add notes, I'm going to take away notes, but I'm going to keep the notes that I use to be notes within the key of the song that I'm in. So songwriting. You write a chord progression. Maybe almost always with it, you're going to be improvising a chord progression, technically. So you think something like, okay, I'm going to be in D major. And I know the chords I have in D major, and I know the notes I have in D major. Let's make it C major just to keep it simple, because you probably, at this point, remember it's just all the white keys. Very simple. So you just need to remember the note names. You don't need to know sharps or flats. So you're like, okay, I'm going to write a chord progression in C major. Let's start with a 1 chord. Let's try going to a 4 chord, which is going to be an F major chord. Let's go to a G major chord. That's in the context of C major. And then we'll do a minor, G major, F major, and then, hey, let's do a 3 chord, which is in this context is going to be E minor, to an F major, and then 6, 5, and then chorus, right? So right there, we're thinking in terms of, I'm in a certain key, here are the main chords I have in that key, in the scale degrees. So I'm thinking in terms of 1 chord, 5 chord, 4 chord, which would like to go to the 5 chord, I'll give it that. And then the 5 chord kind of wants to go to the 1, but I'll go 6 instead. And then I'll go 4. And then 3, which really wants to go to 4. Sure, you can have it. And then a 6 chord, which often after 4, 6, that tends to always feel like it wants to go to that 5. I'll give it that. And then let's go to a 2 to give it a darker tone. So we went from 5 to a 2. So we're just kind of meandering around, right? But the point is we're thinking in terms of 1 chord, 5 chord, 3 chord, and we know, based on the key we're in, what chord is what. That this is our 1, and this is our 5, and this is our 6 in the context of the key we're in. We're in the key of C major, so I'm using only notes in C major, and if I were to sing along and improvise a melody, then you probably don't even have to think about this because your voice will automatically kind of lock onto the right key for the most part if you're even a decent singer. Doesn't mean you won't hit a wrong note. I'm not saying if you hit a wrong note is bad, but generally when you're a singer, you're just kind of used to locking onto the key that you're in. But let's say you're a guitarist, and I'm over here figuring out a chord progression. Whoops. And you're like, okay, how do I play along? Let's say you want to write a melody to go along with what I'm playing, or you want to improvise a solo. Okay, I'm in C major, so right now you can pull out your guitar and you can improvise within the scale of C major, writing maybe a vocal melody, maybe it's meant to be a guitar solo forever, doesn't really matter, same concept. And for the most part, if you keep it in C major, not everything will sound good so that you just are like, oh yeah, that's the song. I just improvised it right the first time. No, but nothing will probably sound egregiously bad, and eventually you will probably land on something where you're like, ooh, there's a good melody right there. I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't think I'm very good at talking and playing at the same time, or improvising at the same time, which, good thing you don't really have to be unless you make YouTube videos about songwriting. But anyway, so keys and chords in context of keys. Those are the big ones. I'm going to give you one last thing. Because when I think of deeply practical music theory for songwriting, I feel like people are busy thinking about like notes and chords and intervals and all sorts of modes, borrowed chords, what's a French chord or crazy stuff like that. And forget that, like, phrases. Phrases is really important. So phrases is basically just understanding that music is in patterns. So let's say we're writing a melody. Let's say that's our A phrase. A phrase is basically a short musical thought. If you're a singer, normally you would take a breath after a phrase. Not always, but breath. So we have an A phrase there. Then the next question is, do we repeat an A phrase? Let's say it's a 4-phrase pattern, which is very common. Most phrase patterns are patterns of 4 or 3. So we have, very simple, right? That's our A phrase. But in the context of, let's say we're writing a vocal melody, we have our first phrase. Let's say we like that. The first question to ask is, okay, should it be AA? Should that repeat again? So the melody would be. So it would be AA. Or would we want to do AB? So our first one is. And then we do something similar but different. Maybe that. Or maybe we do AA first. A. There's a B, so we have A. A again. B. And then C. So that could be maybe a melody. A, B, C. Again, improvising all in C major, right? So, and I didn't even change the chords because we're keeping this super simple. I'm just like hammering home. Hey, we're in C major. Hey, we're in C major. But A. And then you're thinking about, does it sound like that phrase should repeat? Or I write a new phrase? But we said repeat, so A, and then A again. There's our B. And then there's our C, because we went up that time. And melody writing is essentially that, thinking in phrases. You have an A phrase, and then you figure out, do I repeat that A phrase? Does it sound like it should repeat again? Or do I write a B phrase? And then you improvise a B phrase, which, by the way, what I just did, I just accepted the first thing I did, right? Obviously, to write a good melody, you don't usually want to do that. So instead, you'd workshop it. Okay, very simple, but I don't mind that as an A melody. But I shouldn't just be like, oh, first try, called it good. Like, no, try something different. How about that? Maybe that, or... That doesn't sound like anything, so that's just a fail, right? Oh, maybe that. Okay, let's say that's our A. Then that doesn't sound like it. Let's say it doesn't sound like it wants to repeat. So A. B. And then let's do an A-B pattern this time. Not great, right? But this is like 2 seconds. So understanding phrase patterns, and that usually they're in patterns of 3 or 4, and that essentially the process of writing melody is it's within a key, right? So I kept it C major, only C major notes, and then I thought about phrase patterns. I wrote a first phrase, and then I said, okay, do it sound like I want to repeat that phrase? Your first phrase by definition is going to be the A phrase. So then is it going to be AA or is it going to be AB? That's really your only option. Right? Now, B could be an infinite number of things, essentially. But once you figure out let's say you decide you want a B, now you have AB. So now the next question is, okay, do I want A, B, C? Or do I want A, B, and then B repeated again? Or A, B, and then A repeated again? You might have A, B, C, D as a pattern, which means every phrase is different. Usually it's going to be slightly different, not that different, or maybe 2 or 3 of them will be very similar, and then the fourth one is very different, or the third one is very different. And that's going to come over time. And by the way, this is why improvisation should totally be a part of your songwriting routine, is because improvisation is the absolute heart of songwriting. Whether it's improvising melodies, improvising chord progressions. If you're a pianist, great, you get to do both at the same time. That's one of the beauties of being a pianist, right? Right now, that's improvising essentially a melody in my right hand and chords in the left hand at the same time. So if you're a pianist, congratulations. It's a very nice thing. It's a little harder to do on guitar and every other instrument. But keys, chords in context of keys, and then I tacked on phrase patterns. I didn't even plan to talk about phrase patterns today. Hopefully it was helpful anyway, because I just thought of like, oh, wait a second. That's something that I feel like I take for granted that we shouldn't. Not everybody understands that almost all music is in patterns of phrases, whether it be a melody or a hook. Almost always it's in some sort of pattern of 3 or 4, which you would denote with the A, B stuff that we were talking about. All right, so putting it all together, everything has a sound in context. Keys are the context and give a set of notes to work with. So if you're writing in C major, the notes you would write your melodies with, the notes you would use for your guitar solo, for the string parts that you're going to arrange. Let's say you're recording a song and you're going to arrange the strings for it. You would use the notes of the key still. All the notes of the chords that you're going to use. Everything is going to be in the context of the key. And the key gives you the tonic, which is where it sounds resolved, which is connected with the 1 chord, right? Because the 1 chord is the tonic. In C major, your tonic chord and your 1 chord, or it's the same thing, right? It's C major is where it's going to sound at rest, the musical center of gravity. So set of notes to work with, which is very important for everything you write, and then also the set of chords to work with and what they sound like in that context. So understanding chords in context of keys in the Roman numeral notation way is what will make it so that from now on, you will never say again, oh, G major chords sound like X. But instead, you'll think about me saying over and over and over again in this video, ad nauseum. You literally threw up from hearing me say it so much. Hopefully, you've absorbed from me saying it so much that, no, a G major chord doesn't just sound like a major chord or a G major chord. What context are we in? Because a G major chord in the context of G major sounds like a 1 chord, which is very different than a G major chord in the context of C major, which would sound like a 5 chord, because 5 chords don't sound like 1 chords. That's the important way to understand chords, is in context of keys, especially as a songwriter. We did a little bit on the specifics of like 1 chords and 5 chords, and we kind of dabbled in 4 chords. Didn't talk too much about the other ones, but that's something that you can learn over time. I have videos, by the way, breaking down each one of the chords. Like I have a whole video about 1 chords, a whole video about 2 chords, 3 chords. So you can check those out if you want a little bit more on that. It's also something that, to a degree, you learn over time, right? There are tendencies of what chords want to do, and depending on like the chord 3 chords before, that kind of affects what things want to do. That just comes with time and practice and improvising and being willing to make mistakes in improvisation. But these are going to be the foundational concepts to understand. When writing chords, stick to chords within the key, which are chords made up exclusively of notes of the key, is something else we covered. And then phrase patterns. Phrase patterns, which, again, I tacked on, but it's very important because almost everything, whether it be your guitar solo, not always, but very often, if it's a melodic guitar solo, probably, when you're writing a piano hook. So, for instance, this is, let's do, what piano hook do I want to do? Let's do this piano hook. That is A, B, and then, so A, B, C, D. You can see it that way. Or if you just think in terms of right hand versus left hand, the right hand is A, B, right? So that's essentially an A, B pattern in my right hand, and then my left hand does, right? So we have a pattern there. You can think of it as A, B, C, and then since I just hold that for the last one, you could say it's A, B, C, C. And then if you put them together, because they both are ultimately become one part, you have, it totals to A, B, right? It's not that this sounds different than, right? That sounds different, right? So essentially we've made it into A, B, C, D, A, and then we have another A, B, C, D, but it's different. So even things like piano hooks, as I just showed, thinking in terms of patterns, where the right hand being a really good example of A, and then a B. So piano hooks, this would apply. This would apply to melody writing. In general, get used to thinking in terms of patterns. Think in terms of patterns. Label them. Be intentional about them. When you're writing a melody, think, okay, I have my first phrase. I really like that phrase. That's my A phrase. And then your first question should be, do I repeat the A phrase? Does it sound like it should just be repeated? Or should I change it up a little bit? Or should I change it up a lot? Whether you change it a little or a lot, it's still going to be a B pattern. If you do choose to do that, so now you have an A, B. Now the next question is, do you repeat A again? A very common pattern is A, B, A, B. So maybe that's what you want to do. Another common pattern is A, B, A, C. Right? So even when you do A, you have your A phrase, then you figure out, I don't want to repeat that. Doesn't quite sound right to just repeat it again right away. So you write a B phrase. Then you think, actually, it sounds like it wants to go back to the A phrase. So A, B, A. And now the question is, does it want to go back to the B again? Or does it want to be something that we haven't heard yet, which would be a C? A, B, A, C. This is the fundamental way to write melodies, essentially. and to write music in general is those patterns. So we tack that on too. But there's a fundamental theory. Again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but you want a shortcut and you don't want to like have to struggle with keys too much. Just check out my free cheat sheet breaking down all of the major keys, all the main chords, which means all the major, minor, and the one diminished chord in each major key, as well as all the notes. So if you don't want to have to be like, what are the notes in E flat major and what are the chords in E flat major? If you just want to sit with your guitar or your piano or whatever, and you just want to be able to, I just want to do A major today. I want to do a chord progression in A major. It will give you the answers of like, okay, you have an A major chord, you have a B minor chord, then you have a C sharp minor chord. It will give you those answers. You want to memorize it over time anyway. Is it good to memorize the whole half, whole half? Is it good to memorize the circle of fifths and how that applies to keys? Yes, those things are great. They're great tools. But you want to be productive today, right? So just grab that free cheat sheet. That will help you a lot with all of these things. And then commit yourself to actually memorize these over time so that, so that you're at the point where you can, just improvise in C major, improvise in B flat major, and you're not thinking about it. You're not thinking about like whole half. You're not thinking about any of that stuff anymore. You've now transcended the knowledge part and you can just play. That's what you want to get to. Anyway, hopefully this was helpful. Be sure to check out that free cheat sheet. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.